Good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to all our participants. I'm Munazanjum Faruqi, and it is my privilege to be your host for today's DCW conversation hour. Before we begin, a brief introduction about this initiative. It is an open dialogue platform by the urban community Wikimedia, created for meaningful exchanges around the Wikimedia movement's strategic initiatives. Each session brings together remarkable voices that help us reimagine the ways knowledge is created, shared, and sustained. We have a dedicated time for question and answer at the end, so feel free to leave your questions in the chat or present them during the end of that segment. Also, note that the session is being recorded. Today, in our 35th edition of the Conversation Hour, we are exploring a deeply relevant theme: digital knowledge commons. In an era marked by rapid digitization and the ascent of artificial intelligence, the idea of a shared digital common raises important questions about how knowledge is created, governed, and accessed. Together, we will reflect on how archival and open knowledge projects are shaping the future of digital culture, equity, and accessibility. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce our esteemed guest for today's conversation, Ms. Sneha. She is a distinguished researcher whose work spans digital media and cultures, open knowledge, gender, and digital rights. She currently serves as the Senior Research Manager for the Open Knowledge Initiatives Program at the International Institute of Information Technology, Hyderabad. Before this, she worked with the Center for Internet and Society for over a decade, contributing deeply to research on arts and humanities scholarship, pedagogy, and technology studies. Her extensive work reflects a keen engagement with the evolving intersections of knowledge, technology, and society. Today, Sneha will share her reflections on the changing landscape of the digital knowledge commons. We are truly honored to have her here with us. With great pleasure, I now invite Ms. Sneha to kick off our DCW conversation. Over to you, Sneha.
Right. My apologies. I seem to be having some issues with the network here, low bandwidth. So if it's all right, I'm just going to keep my camera off and just use audio.
Yes, fine, that works.
Right. Yeah, my apologies for the delay there again. I dropped off at the very end of your introduction, Ariba, but thank you so much for those kind words and for that great introduction. Yeah, so if it's all right, I could begin with the talk.
Yeah, sure.
Great, great. Yeah, so I think the topic that we sort of we picked for today is the digital commons, or the digital knowledge commons. And I wanted to begin, of course, by talking a little bit about the idea of the commons itself, as people who have been engaging closely with Wikimedia communities, with the larger sort of open knowledge ecosystem. This idea of the commons and its various sort of manifestations, right? The digital commons, the knowledge commons, and I've sort of also just used this strange term called the digital knowledge commons, which is kind of bringing these two things together. Just wanted to get a sense from the room about the idea of the commons itself, right, and what that means to some of you, right? What is the idea that we have about the commons? What does it really mean? So maybe you could start with like a few responses from around the room. Have we come across the term before? Commons, I'm sure with Wikimedia projects itself, the term would be familiar.
I'm only familiar with Wikimedia Commons, where you
Exactly.
upload pictures.
Exactly. Yes. 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 Something that belongs to the public. Public belonging and accountability. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Afi. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I think we can move on to the next slide, Riba. I think Afi has also sort of captured the larger idea of what we mean when we talk about the commons. You could just click on the first sort of point there, Ariba. Yeah. So the idea of the commons is it comes from collective resources, exactly, available unexclusively. Shared resources held and managed by a community. This is something that an ecologist named Garrett Harding had put out first, in the 1960s. And specifically referring to land, referring to sort of agricultural resources, common land, common resources, shared, held by a community, and something that had unlimited access, right? And if you see the parallels with the idea of knowledge, then, right, when you come a little further down into sort of the early 2000s, you have this idea also of knowledge as a shared resource. And a large part of this discussion also comes from, of course, emerging discourse around intellectual property rights, increasing privatization of knowledge resources and institutions. This is, of course, coming from a sort of broad European tradition around the idea of knowledge, and the growth of free speech, rights movements, right? So Hess and Wallstrom, again, this is sort of literature around the idea of the knowledge commons, and looking at how knowledge then as a shared resource becomes an important sort of important point of contention also as you come into sort of the early 2000s, and with the growth of discourse around rights, around sort of even this idea of collective ownership, right, and what that really means. Of course, a lot of the idea of the commons, the term itself comes from an essay that Hardin had written, which is on the tragedy of the commons, and what happens when a large population sort of continues to use or continues to utilize shared resources without any controls, without the term there also is enclosures, right? Without guidelines, without rules, with unlimited, unfettered access, right? And that was the sort of the idea of the tragedy of the commons, that the commons would get exhausted, would not be replicable, would not be sort of usable again after that. But of course, we know from of course, seeing this model in various areas, that the commons has survived, the commons has existed, and continues to exist like that in various ways. So whether you look at commonly resources such as land, and coming now to the idea of the digital, right? So when we look at the idea of digital commons, what exactly are we looking at? We're looking at information, data, content that is collectively owned and managed by a community of users, right? You go to the next point. And there is also a long history to this. When you look at the digital commons, and of course, now when you have the open knowledge movement as one form of that digital commons, right? Starting with discourse around free software, open access, coming to open data, open access to science, very domain specific sort of areas of work. So essentially, what does commoning mean? Commoning as a practice to build better, robust knowledge infrastructures that are multilingual, accessible, and inclusive. And I'll touch a little bit more about what are the sort of various factors that actually come to inform this idea of commoning, right? When you think about commoning in the sort of context that we are all working in today, when we look at, say, Wikimedia projects as a broad sort of digital knowledge, as the knowledge commons or a form of digital knowledge common. What are the various factors that continue to inform the growth of this commons? Yeah, so we can move to the next slide. So coming now to the crux really of the sort of my topic or the presentation today is this knowledge in the digital commons, right? The digital commons is really informed very closely by histories of digitization in India. And this has actually been a very, it's not a simple, very linear sort of history, right? In fact, as several scholars, state of hybridity, wherein we continue to sort of exist in a state of print, of analog, digital in its various forms. It's digital media technologies, whether it is social media now with emerging technologies, and the growth of a certain kind of digital cultures, right, and very multifarious, in some cases multilingual kind of digital cultures as well, which continue to inform how the digital commons as such has grown. And this is a large part of our digitization work is also really informed by the growth of large digital repositories. A lot of Wikimedia work also, digital content in various ways, so whether they're language communities, whether it is GLAM, archives, of course, form a large part of that space, right? So whether it's institutional, whether it is private collections, all of these spaces kind of really speak to this idea of efforts in digitization, large-scale investments by the state, of course, in digitization as well. I think these are all things that we have to be mindful of when we look at the growth of digital cultures, right? The other important thing here is the growing role of big tech, emerging technologies, and policy and cultural shifts. So these are all, I've packed a lot of sort of factors essentially into one topic or one sort of point there. But when we think about how is digitization really taking place, right? You have the growth of course, big tech corporations, emerging technologies, anything from artificial intelligence to, you have various forms, right, of emerging technologies. Policy and cultural shifts. So, what are cultural shifts around the value of openness, right? As we increasingly digitize, does it also mean that we are also putting content out into the open? We are also being able to create good conditions of access. Are we also able to facilitate access, reuse of content? As we also focus on openness, right? So, what is the value of openness, especially at a time when there is increasing awareness of privatization, increasing awareness of the idea of say data protection, right? Platformization, algorithmic curation, and data-driven processes of production, consumption, and circulation. So this is where, of course, the role of AI, large language models, all of this sort of comes in increasingly at this point. And what happens then to just the process of knowledge creation itself, right? Um, Ownership, control, and regulation of digital media and platforms then comes in here as a crucial sort of factor, right? And this is something that we increasingly sort of are observing in terms of, not just in terms of the creation and reuse of technologies itself, but also the larger infrastructures that facilitate the production of knowledge, the production of like even at the level of content and information, right? So if it is, say, news media, if it is, say, educational platforms, right? If it is even digitization efforts that are being undertaken, who actually owns, who controls, what are the sort of regulatory developments around internet governance, around data privacy? If you look at also conditions of, say, or policies around intermediary liability, the increasing sort of challenges around misinformation, online safety, right? All of these are factors then that continue to kind of pose questions around what exactly do we mean then by openness, access to knowledge, and also just the idea of the commons itself, right? If we think of the commons as this large space that allows for unexclusive, unfettered sort of access, use of resources, right? Then what about concerns related to now misinformation, online safety, etc.? So I think these are sort of various factors when we think about the growth of the commons in India. And, I'll come to, of course, specific sort of questions that we have also been trying to engage with as part of the work that I'm doing with the Open Knowledge Initiatives team here. But just thinking about the larger sort of growth, the growth of digital cultures in India, and how that continues to kind of speak to this idea of the commons. Yeah, we can move on to the next slide. Yes. So coming then to knowledge in the digital commons again now, to sort of specific questions that we're hoping to kind of, or that we have been trying to explore as part of our work. And then, of course, specific ideas that emerge from, just this larger context of increasing digitization, the role of, say, or, the growth of emerging technologies and how they shape our understanding of the commons, right? So I think one aspect that I wanted to foreground is the growing role of data in shaping our understanding of knowledge in the commons, right? And when we talk about data, usually we're thinking about something, say we're looking at data largely in terms of numbers, but even that idea has kind of you know um, or the change in the understanding of data, and of it as a sociological concept, and how that has also evolved. For instance, the nature of data produced by archives has evolved significantly. So the traditional archival object itself is being transformed greatly as a result of digitization. So the digital copy of a cultural artifact, has many additional layers to, say, the way it is identified, accessed, studied, reused. So when we think about, multimodality of the internet, the growth of social media, so the data generated by digital archives may no longer, only be sort of qualitative, quantitative. And we also need to think more carefully about things like refining, cataloging, curation, etc. Right? So digitization also sort of then urges us to look closely at the kinds of artifacts that we are producing. So even when you look at various Wikimedia projects, right? So if you look at the types of, Wikidata is a specific project that, of course, looks at, data in a very specific sense. But if you look at Commons, if you look at, just Wikipedia itself, if you look at, of course, now the large sort of concern that has emerged around artificial intelligence and the growth of, say, LLMs, uh, and how they have been sort of the growth of LLMs based on open data, training and testing sort of large language models using open data. And Wikimedia projects form like a large component of that, right? A lot of large language models have been trained, tested, developed, sort of based on the work that is being done by, or generated as part of the larger digital commons, or the knowledge commons, right? So what is our understanding of data then? And data, and open data specifically, right? How do we make sense of that data? How much has it been sort of part of our kind of work in developing and growing the digital commons as such, right? So there have been, like, sort of, even if you look at say, the idea of discoverability, visibility of content, etc., data plays a crucial role there. So we've seen a number of kind of diversifying approaches to metadata creation, looking at non-standard formats. And this takes up an important, or this becomes, increasingly important when we look at language data as well, right? So who is generating, data in various sort of Indian languages, for instance? What is the kind of metadata that needs to be created around it? How do you make content more discoverable, more accessible? And how is sort of open data playing a crucial role in that, right? So whether it's linked open data, creating structured data, etc., what are sort of efforts that are being undertaken there? Apart from that, coming to the idea of languages and where some of these challenges get further amplified, right? So increasingly now, when we talk about now the digital knowledge commons, the question of languages has emerged even more significantly because a lot of the work, if you take now the growth of artificial intelligence, for instance, digitization efforts, of course, working with Indian language content has always had a specific set of challenges, right? So whether it is sort of simply just sourcing and digitizing Indian language content to actually trying to find ways to make that content more discoverable, right? So whether it is, OCR, whether it is challenges with fonts, whether, it is sort of simply, doing what finding good ways to make the metadata of Indian language content much more sort of accessible. I think all of these have been continuing challenges from just digitization itself. And now when we think about large language models, when we think about AI technologies, then what how do these challenges get further amplified, right? So who is again who's creating the sort of data around Indian languages? Do we have data sets for, the sort of vast breadth of languages that we have in India alone, for instance, right? And within this, we're also talking about low resource, underrepresented, marginalized languages, many of them, right? So, what are kind of various interventions that are needed, not only from a technological perspective, because we're not only talking about creating data sets that will help test, train, and deploy, say, AI models, but then also how that data is created, who is sort of, for instance, annotating, who is undertaking the labor that is involved in actually creating the resources that are needed to build such technologies, right? And a lot of these technologies are really built using the digital commons, using data that is actually available out there in the commons. So I think then, this is where the space that many of us work in, right, which is the Wikimedia projects, of course, the larger sort of open knowledge ecosystem. This is where this ecosystem then also comes into sort of the foreground very strongly, right? And many of you may be aware, of course, the idea of, Wikipedia was, sort of named as a digital public good very recently. I think Wikidata has also been sort of added to that list. So, our, sort of, even as we think about, um, in a sense, a crisis of the commons in many ways, right? And this is not a crisis that is a result of, say, something like the resurgence of AI technologies alone, right? And many of us may probably think that this is something that we're seeing now, but this is in a sense, I mean, AI as a technology, the idea of machine learning as a technology has been around for some time, right? Generative AI is, of course, something that has captured everyone's imagination in the last few years. But with every technological turn, there is often this question of are we again approaching a tragedy of the commons? And does something like this, right, the recognition of Wikimedia projects, but importantly, what does that do? It is actually recognizing the idea of something like Wikimedia projects being a digital public good, something that is a shared resource, something that is collectively sort of being owned, managed by a community, a large community of people. Is that actually addressing this potential or impending tragedy of the commons, in a sense, right? And what are other efforts then that can be made to encourage this, to foster these efforts? So how do we locate then, Wikimedia projects within this larger sort of digital knowledge ecosystem? And that's the sort of question that I was hoping we could have sort of a larger conversation around. As Wikimedia projects, what are the kind of various ways in which projects can engage with questions that are coming up in other areas of the digital knowledge ecosystem. So whether it is, say, licensing, whether it is questions around IP, open research, right, or open science as a domain. These are all sort of various forms of the knowledge commons, right, or the work that various cultural institutions are doing, for instance, so broadly within GLAM. Um, how can we think about the role of Wikimedia projects in these various spaces, in connecting the work that a lot of these spaces are doing, which will then continue to kind of foster the idea of a robust and inclusive, multilingual digital commons. Yeah, so we can move on to the next slide. Yeah. So this is, I mean, a lot of my, whatever I've shared here, these are very brief sort of insights. But a lot of this really came from a conference that we had done this was in Pune. It was organized by CIS and the MKCL. This was sometime in 2024. And this was really a conversation around the future of the commons, right? And we really tried to bring together these two or three sort of central questions: artificial intelligence, Indian languages, archives. So I've touched upon briefly I've spoken about all of these three kind of spaces. So, what are kind of generative AI products in Indian languages, training data sets, open source development of Gen AI models. Of course, going back to the whole sort of histories of digitizing preservation, because there's a lot of enthusiasm around developing, for instance, foundational AI models within India, doing this for various Indian languages, right? But there continue to be challenges with digitization itself, with sourcing content, with actually making the available content more accessible to people, who would be able to use them, right? So then, what are the kind of various challenges that we're thinking about here? Archives and digitization spaces, of course, have their own kind of very unique challenges. And I think a key question to ask here also is, yeah, we could go back to the previous slide. Sorry, I'll speak about the collective. I think a key thing that comes up here also is what happens to forms of traditional knowledge, local knowledge, or knowledge that exists within specific languages, right? And this is a much more recent conversation that we had, and we sort of continue to have at the Open Knowledge Initiatives program as well, where we've tried to continue some of these conversations that we started at FOC. So this was, again, a very recent event that we did on Indian languages, but also looking at the intersection of technology, community, and policy, and trying to understand what happens again, when, of course, do these three sort of areas or domains speak to each other? When we talk about technology, community, and policy, where are the intersections? How have they engaged with the development, use, and just the preservation of Indian languages, for instance, right? So, what are kind of emerging questions then around Indian languages, even as we look to creating new and hopefully more accessible technologies? And who are the stakeholders in these conversations? I think this is sort of a key point that came up in those conversations as well. So yeah, we can move on to the next slide. So just very quickly to share something that we have continued since that first conference, something called the Future of the Commons Collective, where this is an informal sort of group which comprises academia, technologists, archivists, creative practitioners, people who work with policy, so, and of course, open knowledge and activists, Wikimedians, GLAM. So this is a cohort that has continued speaking about these various issues, and we meet every month to host a talk, very similar to this series that you have here. Picking up some of these ideas and particular sort of topics of discussion around the commons. The idea really is to see what does the future of the commons really look like, right? In a context where there is where there are, emerging technologies like AI, but continued challenges around digitization, continued sort of problems and issues related to, just access of content in various Indian languages, right? So this is sort of really the idea of this collective. So I would, just sort of want to end on that note, just putting this there. We'd love to sort of hear from you, and of course, let us know if you would love to join any of the sessions that the collective has been doing. So I will stop here because I see that we're at the 45-minute mark. So yeah, and we could open it up for discussion.
If there are any questions or comments from the
Yes,
participants,
I'm having one question. Hello.
please go ahead.
Yeah, okay. My name is Anwar. I'm calling from Chennai. I'm representing the Kaniyam Foundation. We are also interested in open knowledge, and we are doing freetamilebooks.com. We have got a license, Creative Commons license for 850 plus books, and we have released in our website. Around 6 lakh download is going. I'm having only one question. If it is a language concern, IIMs or IITs are having, like in our language, Tamil language, my language is Tamil. If it is a Tamil content is available in the IIM or IIT, it will be shareable to other community also, no? If we know which one is a copyright and which one is not a copyright, because in Tamil Nadu, government is doing a nationalized books. Okay, if the national book release, their authors written some other articles in some magazines or anything they have written. So we know which author is nationalized. If we want to procure or we want to get the data for that, IIM will allow IIT. Have you got my question?
Right. Thank you. Thanks for that, Anwar. So, yeah, I think just a quick clarification. You were inquiring about whether you will have access to digitized content in Tamil, if that content is held by IITs or IIMs as
Yes,
such,
right. Yes, you have got the
right?
point.
Yeah, exactly. So, firstly, I cannot speak for a specific IIT or IIM. Also, the program with Triple IT, International, wouldn't be best placed to respond on behalf of any of the IITs or IIMs as such. Yeah, so I think it really depends on the particular project that has digitized the content and the license under which they would want to put that work out, right? Work out under. So I think one would have to really see what kind of projects are underway in terms of digitizing content. And it is true that a lot of large sort of institutes of national importance, educational institutions, are undertaking projects in digitizing content. The purpose for which they are digitizing also differs, right? There are, like, especially under for instance now, development for AI technologies, under these initiatives you do have a lot of institutes that have been creating data sets in various Indian languages. Some of those are open, some are not exactly, given various sort of restrictions on just how they have been able to put the data together, the conditions of their particular project or grant, right? So I think one would have to really look at the specific project under which the digitization work is being done, and of course, obviously the licenses under which they will actually make it available. So I would say that's I think the best sort of response I can offer at this point. Yeah.
Okay, I can understand your answer, but my concern is recently KILD, they have taken our data for the AI project and they have given an appreciation letter. And they have told they are working with the IITs mostly.
Mm.
They are doing the project with the all over India IITs. That's why I'm asking. If it is a Tamil content is available, no metadata for them. Because I don't know there is a Tamil content is available in Hyderabad IIT or some other IIT. Exactly, I don't know. If we exchange it, I'm not telling IIT only. Any college or any institution, if they exchange the data, whatever data is available in Hindi, they can exchange to Hindi people. Whatever available in Tamil, they can exchange to Tamil people. Because
Sure.
the core people, they don't know it is in an open license or some other license. That is an important thing or not. We will know.
Sure. Yeah.
That's my concern. From your side, you are representing IIT, right?
No, I wouldn't say again, not IIT, because I do work with an IIT, and it's Triple IT Hyderabad, like I said. And I would really speak for the particular program that I'm working with, which of course works largely with open knowledge content creation. So,
Okay. We can contact the offline or online.
Yes,
Is there any?
absolutely. Yeah.
Is there
Yeah.
any email ID you can drop?
Sure.
I can
I
contact
can
you
just put
later.
it on the chat right here. So then
Okay.
I would definitely love to hear from people here. I'm just putting it in the chat.
Okay. And I'm more concerned about the GLAM need to go to the whoever need the accessibility, because in Bookshare they are sharing the this thing copyright book also they are doing a scan and then they are publishing to the accessibility deities. They are having a big gap between GLAM and accessibility. There is no content for them. There is a Tamil or any Indian language. There is no availability of it. This want to be insured about IIT or some other things want to be insured this. Because they also want to get the all things we are getting. That's my concern. Thanks.
Right. Thanks so much, Anwar. I've just dropped my email address in the chat. So would definitely love to hear from folks if there are. Yeah, and I think a larger sort of point that you are speaking about there, Anwar, is also just, discoverability of content, right? And how can you make even if content is being digitized and it is put out as open access, how can you also make it discoverable in a sense? How do people know that this content actually exists and it can be sort of made use of, which I think is of course a much larger question about circulation of content. What is it being reused for as such, right? So which is absolutely a relevant point here.
Yes, Vandana, you can go ahead. You can put your question in the chat box, so you could just unmute yourself.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Sneha, for such a wonderful presentation. So, I am a scholar working particularly in Sindhi language. So, my question is related to that. So, as we know that apart from the languages in India which have their own states, we have lot many languages which have had their own historical circumstances, uh, different issues in terms of visibility or presentation of their language and literature in the overall Indian canon. So when I talk about Sindhi, as you must be well aware about the projects which are being undertaken by IIIT Hyderabad and IIT Madras and Bombay for Bhashini project, where they are training this AI tools and machine translation for different Indian languages, which includes Sindhi as well. But when I speak about Sindhi, it has its own case of being a dispersed language. So now the Sindhi community, which is spread across different states in India, the language is also gradually impacted by the regional languages. Like Sindhis in Gujarat have a lot, now the Sindhis in Gujarat have a language which you can call Sindhi Gujarati, whereas in Maharashtra you can call Marathi Sindhi. So it has a lot of regional impact, whereas where we have Sindh territory, that is in Pakistan, there the language is lot more influenced now by Urdu and Arabic. So when we train Sindhi language for the AI tools, and when we talk about linguist, especially computational linguist, first there is fundamental dearth for linguists who are well trained in Sindhi language, because we don't have Sindhi education in India. And the other part is there is a lot gap, or there is a lot ambiguity in terms of understanding Sindhi as a standardized language for which we can train the tools, because as I have told, it has been assimilated across different languages based on the regional affinities. So how do we see the case of such languages which are historically scattered, impacted, and have like plural trajectory across different regional uh, yeah, that's all.
Right. Thanks so much, Vandana. Yeah, in fact, I mean, I've also, had the opportunity to kind of engage with some of these questions, specifically through the work of, one of our close colleagues who's been working on Sindhi. I can share some of those resources. And, this is a question that came up also at the last kind of event that we did, right, which was on Indian languages. It's called Bahubhasa. And the specific focus there was on languages that are sort of, low resource. And a big question there was also, what exactly do we mean by low resource, right? Low resource, you understand, is a very technical term sometimes,
Yes,
that you
yes.
don't have enough data. The language is not like, you don't have standardized data, especially for languages that are, like you said, dispersed. They do not they're not from a particular region, or not state specific in a sense, right? Then of course that whole question of scheduled languages versus unscheduled languages, underrepresented languages, so I think that has been a challenge, and that comes with, I think, the diversity of languages that we have in our country, and I think in large parts of the global majority, in a sense. So this was, and I think the specific use case where, that we kind of focused on, during that event, was also on translation and, machine translation especially. So you mentioned the project, right, Bhashini, and of course, there is this, the model under Bhashaverse that IIIT has been working on. So I think there were again sort of very interesting challenges that came up with translation between languages, and when you kind of work with a language like Sindhi, for instance, right? So the idea there really is then, that the technologies then need to be nuanced to be able to capture exactly this, right? You need the human in the loop. You need to have resources like trained linguists. You need to have sources of data as well that are much more disparate. You need to have different kinds of, and this is something that we were thinking about, or we discussed through that event as well, that the corpora that you are digitizing, there is so much focus on standardizing, the kind of data that you have, the corpora that you digitize, also standardizing it, but then and this is a very interesting point that came up in one of our keynotes as well, to be able to work with messy data, to be able to work with data that does not follow the norms of how you generally work with language data, in a sense, right? So because that's exactly how language data, or are like the forms of our language are also. A lot of it is not even script based, a lot of it is oral, right? So much of our language is not standardized in a sense. So now are we able to develop technologies that can adapt to this, right? Because the problem is not with the language data itself, it is with the technologies growing and evolving to adapt to the uniqueness, the specificity that each language presents, the same language in different geographical contexts, right? So I think it is really a sort of combination of these various things, right? To be able to digitize different kinds of corpora, so whether it is examples of language data, whether it is literature, different forms of Sindhi literature, for instance, oral, written, different formats of data itself, which will all lend to this kind of uh, creating different contours to the kind of language model that you eventually build. So I know your question wasn't specific, I think, to AI as such, but it was really, I mean, I think the technological challenges also of working with, for instance, a language like Sindhi, which you said does not have standardized data. So I hope that addresses the question that you asked.
Yes, yes, I think you said it quite right, and maybe I can try to add on to that because, as you have already said, like the language like Sindhi has its own distinct challenges. So maybe, as you have already put it, we can have the tools or digital infrastructure that can specifically address the challenges which these languages have. So maybe we can have it other way around because uh, like we are doing a project based on creating audiobooks out of Sindhi rare literature. So for that we are undertaking the literature which was published before 1947, and we are recording these books manually by the Sindhi expert readers. So the idea here is to preserve, to safeguard, and to produce the digital corpora in the authentic language pronunciation. So I think it is also important to see the distinct cases of different languages and to have a very customized digital infrastructure, if it adds up to your point, I hope. That's all.
Right, absolutely. I think the big challenge there also is in terms of resources, right? To be able to create that kind of, digitized. But I think, there are already efforts like this underway because many language activists, many, and particularly in the open knowledge ecosystem itself, many people have already been doing this because they know that the challenges of each language are unique. The needs and the requirements for digital access and visibility, online visibility of languages, it's really unique for various languages, right? And they have actually been working on these aspects. So I think that combined with, of course, the kind of resources that are already available, say with large institutions, I think would be one way to kind of take
True, true.
forward these efforts. Yeah.
Sneha, just one more point I would like to add if the time permits. It's a question, rather, if I can.
Yeah, sure. I think we do have time here.
Yes, so my question is that as I have specifically talked about Sindhi case, so we also have this lake of Sindhi stakeholders who we can see as the linguist who have the knowledge of Sindhi grammatical and who can actually do this task of training Sindhi, or like who can do the task of building Sindhi digital corpora by annotating the digital data. Because as I've told you, there is a problem with Sindhi education, there is no institutional backing. So in this scenario we often see that we don't have the authentic language stakeholders into the place. Rather, these are the available people who do this, which ends up in curating not so accurate database. So like how do you see it? Because what I am trying to say here is that about the significance of having the linguistic stakeholders from the community who have the expertise in the language. And in the case of Sindhi or maybe other Indian marginalized languages where we really don't have those experts anymore. So how do we see this problem? Like how can we try to address it?
Right. That's a difficult one because, I really believe that the wealth of a language, really lies with its community and of course, its literature, all of these sort of spaces, right? The speakers themselves. Yeah, and I'm also trying to unpack, when you say authentic sort of speakers or authentic resources. I feel like even that is an idea that evolves with time, right? I think language also kind of takes on various forms. The community also expands and diversifies in many ways. So one may then have to look for, what are the kind of spaces, and this is particularly, I think, challenging for languages that are dying or, endangered in many ways, right? So when you may not have enough speakers. Sorry, I think someone is speaking in between. Yeah. So I think one would then have to work with the resources that you have. So whether it is available, literature, whether it is cultural institutions that have worked on preservation of a particular language, right? I think those are really the resources that are available. Authentic, I think, also is something that comes together, when a community really validates or kind of you know s- uh, really kind of finds authenticity in the work that is being created, right? So I think that the challenge of authenticity is kind of a tricky one, especially when it comes to something like language for me. So yeah, sorry, I don't think it's a very straightforward answer to your question, but this is definitely a challenging one, I would say, and particularly for languages that are, say, endangered or you know like dying languages where you do not even have a community that will be able to sort of preserve and document. And I would say, as far as possible, of course, agency around language documentation, because the community would know the questions that are most important, the challenges that are most urgent, when it comes to a language. Yeah.
Thank you, Sneha.
Yeah. Thanks.
We have extended beyond time. If anyone has any questions, you can reach out to Sneha on her email. It is given in the chat box. So thank you so much, Sneha, for this incredibly rich conversation. You walked us through the rise of digital cultures, how big tech, algorithms, and platformization are reshaping how knowledge is produced, circulated, and governed. What stood out especially were your reflections on the role of data, multilinguality, and Wikipedia as a digital public good, and how Wikimedia and other knowledge projects can be located within this broader digital ecosystem. It has been a truly enriching session for all of us this evening. And as we conclude, on behalf of Devban Community Wikimedia, I convey our sincere gratitude to Sneha for sharing her time, expertise, and insights with us today. A special thanks to all the participants for joining this conversation hour and contributing to this enriching dialogue. We also acknowledge the entire team for their continued efforts in curating these interactive knowledge spaces that connect Wikimedia's global movement with diverse voices and experiences. Thank you all once again for being here. We hope to see you at our next conversation hour. Until then, take care and keep contributing to the world of open knowledge. Have a wonderful evening.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for having me here.